this is Grandma Dawn. I'm just going to read about a story about the three little pigs. You might know about these little guys, but here it goes. Once upon a time there were three little pigs, and the first was a lovable little fellow, fat and jolly and always happy. But he was very lazy. He didn't like to work. He thought it was more fun to dance and sing. So when the time came for him to build himself a house, he decided to do it the easiest and quickest way possible. Of all the materials at hand, it seemed to him that hay and straw would be the best. He gathered a big pile of it, built a light framework, and then laughing and singing merrily, he danced around the house, tossing handfuls of straw at it, letting them fall where they would. It was not a very strong house, of course, but to him it was foolish to waste time working when there was so much dancing to be done. In almost no time at all, he had completed his house, and the little pig took out his flute and began to sing. I build my house of straw, I build my house of hay. I toot my flute, I don't give a hoot, and play around all day. So playing and singing, he danced his way down a winding path to the house of his brother, the second little pig. This pig was also building himself a house, and he was building it of little sticks and twigs and leaves. His home was as weak, as flimsy as his brother's, and by the time the first little pig arrived, it was almost finished. So the second piglet took out his fiddle and began to play and sing. I build my house of sticks, I build my house of twigs. With a high diddle diddle, I play on my fiddle and dance all kinds of jigs. Then the little pigs joined hands and started a mad, happy dance. They would laugh a little, sing a little, and play a little, but they didn't stop dancing until they reached the house of their brother, the third little pig. Now this little pig was very, very busy indeed, and he frowned as he saw his frivolous, light-hearted brothers approaching. He had told them not to waste so much time singing and dancing. He had warned them that they were all in danger, that storms and rains might come at any moment, and their house should be built of materials that could withstand them. But more than that, he knew the big bad wolf that lived nearby was very fond of tender young pigs, and the wolf was almost certain to try to catch him for breakfast someday. So the house must be doubly strong. It must be a fortress in which the little pigs might hide when the wolf was licking his chops and hunting for a meal. Realizing all these dangers, the third little pig decided the best materials were none too good for his house, and there was nothing quite so safe and strong as bricks and stones, so that is what he chose. The first two little pigs laughed when they saw their industrious brother mixing mortar and fixing the bricks and stones one on top of the other, and applying a coat of wolf-proof paint to the roof. But when they called to him and asked him why didn't he come down and join them, he replied, I build my house of stones, I build my house of bricks. I have no chance to sing and dance, for work and play don't mix. At this, the other two pigs laughed and mocked him and began to sing and dance. He don't take no time for play, time for play, time for play. All he does is work all day, tra-la-la-la-la. The third little pig slapped another brick into place before he looked up from his work and warned them, you can play and laugh and fiddle, don't think you can make me sore. I'll be safe and you'll be sorry when the wolf comes to your door. But the two little pigs laughed louder than ever. The first one took up his flute, and the second one took up his violin, and together they played a merry little tune, dancing and singing all the while. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? La 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 la. Away they went down the path through a meadow to the edge of a deep forest. Their happy singing floated through the woods, finally reaching the ears of the big bad wolf, who was prowling around looking for a nice juicy meal. He stopped, he cocked his head on one side, listening with ears erect. Then a crafty smile crept over his face, and he slipped from tree to tree, at last coming to the edge of the little glade in which the two pigs were capering. They weren't worrying about the big bad wolf. In fact, they pretended to be very brave and imagined what they would do if they found him. "We'll punch him in the nose. We'll tie him in a knot. We'll kick him in the shins. We'll put him on the spot." They laughed loudly and began to sing again. "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? The big bad wolf, the big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Tra-la-la-la-la." But suddenly they stopped. Their eyes popped open in terror. Their little curly tails stuck straight out behind them. They began to shiver and shake and tremble, for behind a nearby tree they saw the cruel eyes of the wolf leering at them. They saw his mouth, his long sharp fangs, and his tongue licking hungrily at his chops. Then
just keep going.
Terribly frightened, the little pigs turned tail and ran for their very lives, each one onto the flimsy house he had built. As the first pig bolted into his house of straw, he turned around quickly and drew in the welcome mat, slamming the door shut in the face of the infuriated wolf. The poor little pig shook with terror when he heard the wolf pound on the door and cry in his most ferocious voice, "Open the door and let me in." But the piglet answered in a weak and trembly squeal, "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." Then said the wolf, "I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." When the little pig heard this, he trembled over and over. He forgot his playing and dancing and singing. He wished that he had listened when his industrious brother had urged that he build his house more securely. For a house of hay and straw with little protection against so mighty an enemy as the big bad wolf. But it was too late now. All he could do was hold on tightly and pray that the wolf would be unable to break in. The wolf drew in his breath, straightened up, filled his lungs with air, his chest swelled out like a balloon, then he leaned forward and blew. Woof! The little house shook, and a few wisps of straw flew off. Again, the wolf took a deep breath, and woof! The whole handful of straw were blown away, and the house began to totter. The wolf smiled happily and took in a most tremendous breath of air. And this time the whole house blew away. The roof fell down over the little pig, and as he was scrambling to get out of the ruins, the wolf pounced on him. Squealing in terror, the little pig managed to slip out of the wolf's grasp and ran helter-skelter toward the twig house of his second brother. He arrived just in time, rushing to the door and slamming it shut just as the wolf arrived. Outside, the wolf looked at the house of twigs. I was a little bit stronger than the first house, but still it was very, very weak and flimsy. However, he was somewhat tired from his huffing and puffing and running, so he decided that instead of blowing it down, he would get into the house by trickery. He pretended to be very discouraged and tried to make the little pigs think he was going away. His eyes winked craftily, and he said in a loud, deep voice, "Well, they're too smart for me. Guess I'll go home." Laughing to himself, knowing that the little pigs had heard his remark, he turned and ran down the path through the gate, but instead of going back home, he hid behind a tree to see what effect his trick had on the little pigs. Inside the house, the pigs heard what the wolf said, and they heard him running away. They looked at each other and blinked once or twice. Both of them sighed with relief. The wolf was gone. The danger was past. There was nothing to be afraid of now. So they got their fiddle and flute. Around and around they danced, singing merrily, "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, tra-la-la-la-la." As soon as they started to sing, the wolf laughed, long and loud. He knew he had outwitted them, and he planned his next step carefully. He found an old sheepskin, a clothes basket, and a baby's bottle. Armed with these, he approached the twig house, climbed into the basket, pulling the sheepskin over his head, and putting the bottle in his mouth. Looking very innocent, he knocked softly on the door. Hearing the knock, the two little pigs were very frightened. They crept over to the door and called, "Who's there?" The wolf replied in a high, squeaky voice, "I'm a poor little sheep with no place to sleep. Please open the door and let me in." Peeping out of a tiny crack in the door, the pigs saw the long fangs and the large paws of the wolf hiding under the sheepskin. So they slammed the door shut and said, "Not by the hair of our chinny chin chin. You can't fool us with that sheepskin." The wolf was furious. He jumped up, threw off his disguise, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." Without another word, he took a deep breath and he huffed. He took another deep breath and he puffed. Again and again he huffed and he puffed. And soon the twig house was blown away. All there was left were the two little pigs holding up the door. They looked around and startled. They saw that their house was all gone. They peeped out of the door and saw the wolf starting to die for them. With a squeal of fright, they began to run. But this time the wolf was too fast for them. He grabbed hold of their tails, and as they ran, he was dragged along behind. The little pigs were terribly frightened. They ran this way and that, trying their best to shake him off. But nothing they could do would make him let go. He held on for dear life, licking his chops hungrily, knowing that he had a nice tender meal almost in his very hands. As the two little pigs ran toward their brother's brick house, they saw one chance of escaping. As they approached a tree, one ran on one side and one ran on the other. Being in the middle, the wolf kept kerplum, smack, right into the tree trunk. He gave a loud howl of rage and pain and loosened his grip. Before he had a chance to collect his wits, the piglets had scampered into the brick house, slammed the door behind them, and bolted under the brick bed, where they lay quaking with fear. Their little tails were trembling. The third little pig looked out and saw the wolf approaching. He changed the door shut. Then he turned to his panic-stricken brothers, who were still under the bed. "See," he said, "I told you what would happen when the big bad wolf came around. Only bricks and stones are wolf-proof. Now at last you're safe and sound." As to prove this statement, he went over to the piano and he began to play. The other pigs looked out from their hiding place and saw there was no more danger. Up they jumped, got out their violin and flute, and together the three little pigs played a song. "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, tra-la-la-la-la?" Another knock at the door sent the first two pigs scurrying under the bed again, as frightened as ever. The third pig, knowing how securely he had built his house, went over to the door and called, "Who's there?" "I'm the cleanies brushman," came the reply. "I'm giving away free samples." Then the pig opened the door as far as the chain would permit and held out his hand for the brush. Through the crack came a long, hairy black arm, which the pig immediately recognized as belonging to his enemy, the wolf. He snatched the brush away, and using it for a club, he brought it down again and again on the wolf's paw. With a cry of pain, the wolf jumped back from the door, threw off his peddler's disguise. His eyes were ferocious, and he shouted, "By the hair of my chinny chin chin, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. The wolf straightened up, and with a terrific huff and a puff, he began to blow. He huffed and he puffed and he puffed and he huffed. But the little brick house didn't move an inch. He drew in his breath, swelled up again, his braces burst, and he leaned forward and he huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed and till he was blue in the face, but not one single brick fell. He took hold of the door and began to shake it. This made the third little pig laugh merrily, for he knew that nobody in the world could ever shake a brick house down. So he went over and sat at the piano where he played himself a musical accompaniment to the wolf's wild rattling. And all the wolf's huffing and puffing and rattling and shaking and pounding were useless. The little brick house stood exactly as it was, with the wolf outside. The big bad wolf was disappointed. He was hungry and he was angry. He was furious. He made up his mind that the three little pigs should not escape. He looked around. The windows were all closed and shuttered. He could not possibly get in that way. Then a cunning gleam stole into his eyes as he looked up at the roof. The chimney! He would climb down the chimney. Quickly he jumped to the roof. He glanced around cautiously and he listened. And the little pigs had not heard him. He would slide down the chimney, and in another moment they would be in his grasp. Inside the house, the third little pig was nervous. The wolf had made so much noise outside, and then there was silence. Where had he gone? Had he given up and gone home? Or was he planning some other trap for them? If he did not have some other plan, what was it? And how could the little pig stop him? The answer to these questions came suddenly. The pigs heard a slight noise in the fireplace, and he saw a few specks of smoke from the chimney onto a large pot of water. With a cry of delight, the little pig rushed over to the fireplace and pulled the lid off the pot. Down came the wolf, and he fell straight into the pot of water. With a terrifying cry, the wolf jumped up in the air, flying clean out of the top of the chimney and falling to the ground below. Away he went, howling at every jump, faster than any wolf in this world could ever run away. The three little pigs peeped out of a window and saw him galloping down the road, and they laughed until the tears came into their eyes. Then they looked at each other. They were safe again. The wolf was gone. There was nothing to worry about. So the first little pig grabbed his flute, the second little pig tucked his violin under his chin, and the third little pig sat down at the piano. And if the wolf had been close enough, he would have heard them playing and singing, "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf, the big bad wolf? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf, tra-la-la-la-la?" But the wolf didn't hear them. He was far too far away, and he never came back again. That's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it.